is Alex Bayarin. For those who don't know me, I'm the organizer of this meetup. I started to run this meetup a few years ago because I wanted to set a place to discuss things about Agile and Scrum in English for the community, which is perhaps more likely to come meetups run in English. And today we try to do one meetup a month. Okay? We are grateful to Vistaprint because they are hosting us today. And I wanted to just discuss things about a topic. I'm a professional Scrum trainer, and I'm talking trainings about the importance of HR backing the transformation and the culture and the values and everything which makes Agile not only a framework or a set of practices, but change in the whole organization. So it's that important, but I wanted to know more about how the people working in HR see us, see the Agile people or Agile coaches or whatever. So I wanted to make this meeting. We are having Amy and Mario. They are working at Vistaprint, and they are going to introduce themselves, explain, and Daniella from Kodify. They have experience in HR in Agile environments, and I think it's going to be a quite interesting event. So I have a set of topics to discuss. It's going to be a panel, just open for your ideas or your questions. And well, I hope you make the most of it and you enjoy it. So please.
Hi, I'm Amy Jackson. I'm Vistaprint. I'm based out of our Waltham, Massachusetts office, and I'm in HR. I've been in HR for a number of years, but I'm also simultaneously in my HR role being trained as an Agile coach. So very excited to talk to you today about HR and Agile transformation.
I'm Daniella Sikora. I work at Kodify, and this is Kodify. I work with Red Group. I recently joined Kodify, so I will also draw my past experience. So I don't have an Agile coach experience, but I work very closely with Agile, with Scrum Masters, and in Agile environments. So hopefully I can contribute to the conversation, bringing my HR experience and my sort of like knowledge of Agile as well.
Hi, I'm Mario Moreira. I've been in the Agile field for about 20 years now. I was fortunate enough to bring Ken Schwaber, who's a co-founder of Scrum, into Fidelity Investments, where I worked. And since then, I've been in the field working in a lot of different levels of Agile, and more recently in the enterprise level, as well as master coach, to actually bring up to speed many other coaches. And as the enterprise level, a big focus of mine in the recent years has been to shift other areas besides just teams to Agile, such as HR, finance, marketing, and a number of other groups that, in order to really do Agile effectively, the whole organization needs to do it.
So I propose just to discuss a set of points and can pick up from the other or any other. And if you feel like you want to ask or comment something, please do. Okay. So the first topic to discuss is which are the differences you think there are between an HR specialist working in a traditional organization or an Agile organization. Different. Which is the role? Does it change?
I can start. I don't know that the role itself per se changes. I think in a traditional organization, the mindset of HR is different and isn't necessarily thinking about Agile. And in an Agile organization where HR is coming along, the mindset is in support of Agile mindset, and therefore they are more engaged in practices that support an Agile mindset. So I think it's an evolution of how the role evolves when you actually apply Agile. And I believe that as you go more Agile, the HR professionals work more with the entire organization and not necessarily just the senior leaders, but really I'm thinking about how you adapt your programs to reinforce the behaviors that you embrace in an Agile environment.
I agree. I would also add that in a traditional organization, the focus would be very heavily on the process. Whereas, for example, I found in coming from working in a startup, the focus is more on people, so it's like people over processes, which is something that I've applied myself. It's being focused on employee engagement and employee experience as well, very heavily. So that's sort of like investing in the culture and really looking after people, and that should be number one priority for HR, which I feel like it's very much lost in traditional organization when there's a lot of structure, where the HR teams are very big and it's not scalable. It's just that sort of like human element is very often lost. That's my experience.
So in the traditional organizations, there tends to be less of a focus on culture. And Agile, as you may know, the mindset is very much focused on culture. I think when you pair HR, who can have a great role to play in the culture, with Agile, I think that can make a very strong combination. That's why at Vistaprint, we are pairing our HR with our Agile coaches. Because what we're realizing is we're both focused on culture, how to make it a more adaptive culture, how to make it a better culture for the teams, for employees, as well as more of a customer value culture. So I think bringing those together makes for a strong pair.
Please, if you want to make any question or comment, please do it. The Q&A is going to go alongside the discussion. Okay. So,
The question,
yeah.
the question is how to start. If we want to go to that, what would be the first little steps that we need to follow?
For HR?
Yeah.
So I guess the first thing to do is start getting familiar with Agile. So if there's some Agile education, that would be a place to start. The only thing I would caution is there is, of course, Scrum Master education, but that's really designed for Scrum Masters. So the type of education is going to be important. So there might be better reading early on, so how to start thinking about that. I mean, coincidentally, you asked a great question. There's this book coming out soon, which actually has a chapter on HR and Agile. And so it'll start giving you some ideas of how you might get started. But certainly start getting some Agile education. And that's where I first definitely start. If you have a coaching program in your organization, or like an Agile group, that would be another place to start tying yourself in.
I would like to add to this, it also helps a lot to learn from others. So get connected with other HR folks who already practice it and who have like best practices or great stories to share. I think that's always my preferred way of learning.
What happens if team members are not located in the same building with the Agile coaches? So you have a team in Germany, you have a team in France, you have a team in UK. How do you manage to keep it going? Like, big picture.
I think what's like, for example, at Kodify right now, we have part of our team is remote. They come to see us in Barcelona every 3 months. So they're scattered all over Europe, from Poland, Malta, Greece. So it's a team that's never sort of like together in the office. And like for me as a HR person, what's really like what I see was really essential for them is to be constantly connected with the kind of what Mario mentioned before, the culture, because culture is so important in the Agile organization. Without the culture, like it's very hard to build anything. So whereas you keep connected, I don't know, whatever sort of communication tool you may be using in your organization, whereas it's Slack, or is it something else? This is when you think about it, it's really like the first sort of connection that you can make with these people. So keeping that engaged and active is super important. And then what you can also do is to try sort of like so what I did in my previous company with a team that was based in the States. So like, part of the culture was doing activities together, and one of the things we came up with is to do cross sort of like office step competition where anyone can participate, but it's a fun sort of like competitive exercise like experience, and you can get engaged and sort of like build culture and connect with different teams that you don't usually work with run cultural activities. Some of the ideas would be like that.
The other thing you can do is if you have multiple sites, you will often find that you will have local Agile champions or people interested. Start connecting that group. Start meeting with them. Because as you say, if it's distributed, and most companies are distributed today, that's how you start to build that circle of champions. Just start connecting them and starting occasional meetings.
Can you explain, please, the KPIs of an agile organization?
Key process indicators. Either of you like to take that?
How to measure if your organization is agile or not? It's just a feeling, a mindset of something in the air, or it's something measurable?
I think this, a KPI, how do you measure if an organization is agile? And then, it's continuous feedback. It's super important. So we were discussing this earlier, actually, for example, like performance reviews. If you keep a performance review once a year, like how do you measure? How is this measured exactly? If it's just happens once a year, so it's like what sort of like Agile coaches do, like having regular like retros with the team and one-on-one meetings. So as a HR person, I recently joined my company. Now, one thing that I would like to do is have a one-on-one with everyone to get a feel of the organization, of the culture, and I think this is a number one KPI. Having regular sort of like feedback and teaching people, how to be open. To that, perhaps this is a good indicator of like how the culture functions.
Who's working in an agile company here? More than the half. Yeah.
So,
No. I'm sorry.
Not yet. The current time is not yet.
That's why we came.
so some other things you can look at are, so what's really the essence of Agile? The essence is, are you delivering more value to your customer? Right? And so you look at those sorts of things. Like you look around your organization. Is it focused on cost, schedule, and scope? Then where's the value? Where's customer value? So you have to start shifting your measures to value delivered. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you meet a deadline if the customer doesn't like it. So are you starting to shift your culture through the delivery of customer value? And at that point is when you start looking for KPIs that will align with that. Such as, are we even measuring what value is for our customer? Are we starting with that? Right? So and there's a lot more that you can glean.
We're talking about culture orientation here. When we talk about Scrum in the software development arena, it implies projects which require full dedication and self-organizing teams. How do you reapply that into an HR, into the HR department? Are you fully dedicated to specific projects? Are you fighting in different fronts at the same time? How do you do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Right now, we are probably structured more as a traditional HR organization, but we recognize the need to experiment ourselves with ways in which we can self-organize and even ways in which we can self-manage, such that we can then take those learnings back into the organization and help coach others. We are taking on different initiatives like I was talking to Daniella earlier about our performance management processes, and we are kind of organizing a team around how do we think about how we evaluate employee performance going forward, and how is that different in an agile environment than in a traditional environment. And so we have a team of people that's focused on transforming the way we do performance and development and kind of swarming around that and breaking that down into increments that are actually meaningful for our employees.
Picking up on Mario, he or someone discussed about the appraisals. I just, when I read Management 3.0 book by Jürgen Appel some years ago, I was shocked because he proposed to remove completely those kind of appraisals and moving into another way of seeing the value delivered by people or how they collaborate. So my question is, are you finishing with manager-led appraisals and yearly appraisals? which other ways, like 360-degree appraisals or any other practices, are you putting in place or removing for of them, or how are you trying to assess the performance or the how people contribute to the agile-ness of the organization?
So we are eliminating our annual performance management system because we believe that by receiving feedback one time a year, it really doesn't help you. I mean, it doesn't support the agile practices and mindset of continuous feedback. And so what we are replacing it with is this notion of real-time feedback that can come from not just your manager, but from your peers or your teams. And so in order to do that, we don't want to prescribe the frequency in which that needs to happen, other than that it should be happening frequently and real time, and that allow teams in a self-managed environment to be able to figure out how they best can give and receive and when they get feedback. But what we realize is that that's challenging for people. It's not easy to give feedback, and it's oftentimes not easy to receive feedback. So what we need to do is equip our teams with the capabilities to be able to give constructive feedback and to also receive it, and what do you do with that feedback? And so that's like the increment that we're focused on right now, is how do we educate our organization and equip them with the tools to be able to do this well, and to be able to receive 360 feedback from anyone in the organization, and that the onus is on the employee and not the manager to be making sure that this happens. Because at the end of the day, it's really, we want people to be motivated themselves by receiving this feedback for their benefit and not from a manager needing to give it. So that's one area that we're focused on.
I couldn't agree more with with teaching people how to give constructive feedback, and I actually think that this is where an agile coach comes in, where they through their retros and one-on-ones, they coach people how to receive and how to give feedback through a set of exercises. You can do a hot seat exercise where each person sort of like evaluates anyone else on the team, and we did a similar exercise using actually an online tool, which is something that also like helps HR to be more agile, using tools that are very simple but that are very accessible to everyone, especially in like tech companies and scrubbing things like using paper when you have to. There's like several types of behavior that may necessarily have been discussed in the beginning when the employee started, and they may not have a very clear understanding of what their objectives were. So we sort of like opened 360 team review, where you can actually decide who you want to give review by. So that was very often you can invite different outside of your team who you may not always work with, but you collaborate with. So that's also very helpful for projects.
And building on your activities piece, I mean, it's not just about teaching somebody how to give and receive feedback. There has to be a trust amongst the team, and that psychological safety needs to be there. So you also, in conjunction, need to be, as a coach, helping teams build that trust and that psychological safety such that you can open the door for that feedback. So there are a lot of layers there that are important that you need to focus on. But to the performance, so essentially, I mean, you'll know from your peers whether or not you're performing well. I mean, that's ultimately where, so when you ask about the performance management, it's not just like about a rating at the end of the year. I mean, you'll know where you stand based on the work that you're doing with your teams and the feedback that you're getting from your peers. And a number in a system is just a number. I mean, at the end of the day, what are you delivering today and how are you developing as an individual?
But yeah, I agree with like you will know if you are performing or not, but it's very important for them to also know that they are not performing or they're performing well. Right. So like, praising people's work, it's so important. Like recognizing each other's work, I think it's super essential. Like on a regular basis, it could be something really small, right? But it's really important. And giving constructive feedback at the same time is super important too. Because I was in a situation where an attorney found that he had no idea that he was underperforming because he wasn't receiving regular feedback. So yeah.
And this is the important thing to consider. This is a transformation. So you're not just going to all of a sudden say, hey, let's just start giving 360 feedback, right? It has to start somewhere. If you're operating in a traditional system, maybe the first thing you need to do is separate your bonus or your salary increase from your growth. So that would be the first thing you want to do. You want to separate those two so they're not tied. That way, you can then start focusing on growth according to what they share. So that can be moved separately. The other thing you might want to consider if you're doing a lot of individual objectives, move to team-based objectives. So that way, either we operate as a team. Nothing gets you to focus operating as a team as something that focuses your bonus and or merit increase as a team, right? So those would be other ways to shift as you're starting to work on this culture.
We were talking about feedback before. Apart from feedback, do you resort to any other mechanisms within the Agile philosophy to tackle the concept of organizational and human failure in a constructive way? How do you cope with failure? How do you benefit from failure?
Well, yeah. So we talk about it like we want to fail fast and learn from those failures, and so that's what we encourage. So it's a mindset, and it's a cultural kind of belief that we have in the organization that we want to learn quickly and fail fast and learn from that. So aside from just talking about it and actually sharing stories about that and what we've learned and celebrating it more as a success is one way to address that.
Yeah, I would say maybe in HR, I'm not sure I answered the question very well, but in HR, like learning from your failures, also being open to change, I would say. So, for example, I don't know, bringing a new tool on board, right? That would sort of like facilitate everyone's work. It may work, but it may not. So, being open to change, to being adaptable as well, it's super important. And being as a HR person, it's also very important to be open to feedback because also be a challenge.
I caution you though when you use the word failure, because I think the word failure and success have a wide variety of meaning. There's never a total failure and there's never a total success. So I tend to use the word learning. What did we learn? Right? Because even a lot of success I see isn't all that successful. And I still challenge people, well, what did we learn from this? And that's where I call it a culture of learning, because in every action that we do, are you in fact learning something? And then more importantly, are you putting that learning back into the next increment for having something to be more successful?
Okay, next, another thing to discuss is, do you have a sort of committee of practice of Scrum Masters trying to create a network so they can share experiences and they can somehow be a point of contact to HR instead of going to ask each and every Scrum Master around the organization?
I work in a small company where I work very closely with the Scrum Master, so I'm the only HR person, the only Scrum Master, so we work together.
Only speaking.
And in my previous company was the same.
Currently within this firm, we don't have any formal mechanisms between Scrum Masters and HR. It's more within the functional units. But we often hear about some of the challenges that they face, but we don't have currently formalized.
Although we're expecting big things from two HR people who are in our Agile coaching circle and becoming coaches. And so they are maybe just being a little modest, but they are hearing about a lot of the challenges across Vistaprint because they're in with the Agile coaches today. And any Agile event that occurs that we host or support, they're part of it. And so we just think that's a great way to move forward because there just needs to be that pairing. And it's not just HR and Agile coaches. There's probably a whole host of other roles that probably ought to be more connected, but this is really a great place to start.
Okay, so when you teach Scrum, people somehow, or many times not realizing of the deep effects of self-organization within companies. So I would like to know how is self-organization of teams relevant to HR, and which are the effects you are seeing of self-organization within the company, starting from a traditional mindset or way of thinking, moving to a more agile.
Well, I can chime in.
I was just thinking because for the last few years I've only been working with self-organized teams, so I'm just trying to switch back to what it would be like.
Yeah, it could certainly be interesting. If you're used to now working a certain way, you probably don't even want to go back.
It would be very hard to go back. Yes.
So one of the things that we're starting to recognize at Vistaprint is there is a benefit to decentralize certain types of work to the team. And in order to even do that, we need to have self-organizing teams. So if I start saying, hey, instead of a functional manager telling the team, here's how you should build it and all that stuff, you need self-organizing teams to figure that out themselves, because the whole point of self-organizing means you give decision-making to the level of people who have the most knowledge, or the teams. They know how best to design it, build it, develop it, test it. And so I think it's something that almost has to be part of an agile transformation. And when HR comes along, it makes it, depending on how it's structured and where in the phase of the transformation it is, it can be easier to work with teams as opposed to individuals one at a time, because teams have the same common goals, right? Because there is a framework for a team. A team has to have the same common goal. And so it becomes then easier to work with teams if they all have the same common goals.
Okay, so another thing of self-organization is self-formation or self-creation. Is a pretty advanced agile way of organizing teams. I don't know if your experience, if people can choose the team they want to work with.
So we currently don't have teams that are just self-organizing and deciding which teams they want to be on. But with that said, I'm aware that we have had some experiments in our technology organization where those that have been on a team that's performing quite well and the team no longer feels like they're being challenged in their work, they are running some experiments about being able to self-select onto a team for new and varied experiences. And I think we have someone here that could share a little bit more about that if you guys are interested in digging in, but it's not something we do across the organization today. Oh, Antonio, I was just talking about the experiments with the technology around self-organized teams. Self-forming, sorry.
Yeah, I can provide 5 minutes each if you want. So what we did a few months ago, there's no one from technology here. So a few months ago, we gathered all together, the technology, software engineers and so on. And we basically asked them to decide who they wanted to work with. The question was more on who do you want to learn from and who do you think you can teach, so you can choose who you work with in the future. So basically they decided, they self-organized to form new teams. I would say it was successful because the teams, they are still together. They have been through the forming, storming thing, but now getting to norming. So I think the result was quite good. The process wasn't very easy, like to get them to self-organize towards forming teams, but I think it was a successful experiment.
In fact, one of the leaders who focused on self-forming, he and I collaborated on an article focused on self-forming and how you might go about it. So there's some shared information on that, and it's very interesting because there's self-organization, there's self-forming, and then there's self-management. So you might hear those terms in Agile. They're all 3 different things, and they're all different levels of maturity. Self-organization is sort of the lowest level, although it takes quite a bit of maturity just to do that. And then self-forming is the next level, which means now you actually start picking your teams, and then self-management means the teams actually go beyond. Self-organizing means someone still tells us what work to do, and we kind of decide who should, I do this, you do that, you kind of decide amongst yourself. Self-management, the highest level, is we actually own the budget. We'll still understand the strategy, and we'll try to form around the whole strategy and how we should support the organization. And we do all of the stuff that a manager would do within the team. So it's even another level of sophistication.
Do we have anyone here who comes from a self-managing organization?
Or self-organizing or self-forming. Yeah, it's pretty advanced practice.
I would like to ask about the soft skills of the people when self-organizing. Because there are people that is more collaborative but very good in technical skills. If you live for self-organization, do you fully trust that these teams will be balanced?
That's a good question. So you get some people are introverts, some people are extroverts. But what we found is in an engineering organization, what's the percentage of introverts to extroverts? What do you guys think?
90 introvert.
High degree of introverts and a small degree of extroverts. What we find is everybody actually has the best intentions when they start. They have the best intentions. And it's usually management or someone else who makes the roadblocks for the teams. So it doesn't mean that you still shouldn't have an Agile coach or a Scrum Master that understands what a healthy team looks like and understands what a good self-organizing team looks like. So that to me is very critical, because occasionally I'll have to rescue teams because they'll start to do Agile and they'll say, we're going to do self-organizing. And they literally have no idea, but they give it a try. But usually they get into quagmires of people who want to be the leader and all this kind of stuff, probably what you're getting to. And so my strong recommendation is, if you're ever going to try self-organizing, you have to have either an Agile coach or a Scrum Master who has experienced it. Or an HR person.
Good point.
Okay, so another thing is, in traditional organizations, conflicts in teams are typically managed by managers. So if we have self-organized teams without managers, how are conflicts managed? How are conflicts solved or discussed? And which is the role of HR? If it's completely managed by Scrum Masters, or HR is helping on that? If you ever had a conflict.
Never.
In Barcelona, were about 14 or a little bit less. The role of a Scrum Master was a key person, obviously, in bringing in just the Agile process to sort of life. But also the conflicts within the team. As a HR person, I would work very closely with her, sort of identify, to get feedback on what's happening in the team. Because very often, I wasn't part of the retros, I wasn't part of the process, so it's, from my opinion, I've come to in my past experience, I would come to the picture when the team could resolve it for some reason. But usually, if it's an agile environment, if it's a team that knows how to measure good feedback, if they can look at their sort of the processes from the distance and learn from that, and with the help of an agile coach, usually the conflicts were resolved. So I think that the persona of an agile coach is very important, but HR can help with that as well, of course. And that's why it's so important to keep in touch with the employees, to have regular one-on-ones, even if it's not something formal, but sort of to get a sense of what's going on within the organization, within the country.
Yeah, I agree. I believe that oftentimes these are raised when the team can't solve them on their own, and I think the role of Agile coaches and HR as coaches can try to equip teams to be able to solve these on their own. But when they do arise, it's about understanding and getting to the root cause of what that is, and then kind of helping the teams through that. It's really case by case, depending on what the challenge is.
Yeah, I will say that given that self-organization, self-forming, self-management are more mature levels of practice, each team should also be educated in soft skills, much more so than in a basically hierarchical team. And the reason why is you want the team to be able to solve its own problems as well. Part of self-organizing is solving your own problems. So like our team, we actually, our Agile coaching team actually learns different types of team problem-solving skills, partly for ourselves, because we're a self-managed team, but partly to help other teams. So for example, like servant leadership. Probably a good idea to understand servant leadership. It's probably a good idea to understand psychological safety. It's probably a good idea to learn some conflict management skills, like ways to talk to each other and things like that. And so that way you can also share that with teams.
The question, if you're moving away from a hierarchical organization, what is the role of the manager in the new organization? How do you support that transition in enabling that transition?
I'd like to hear their thoughts.
I think it's a lot about the shifting of the mindset of the manager and really what they should be focusing on. And Mario mentioned servant leadership, and it's around them acting more as a coach and mentor and somebody that helps remove impediments. Because if the team is actually given an outcome that they self-organize around and they determine how it is that they will deliver this, the manager is really there to just help support them along the way. So the days of command and control, coaching them out of that and into a more servant leadership style of coaching and mentoring and managing.
So it is a big challenge because it can be confronting to the identity of managers who got to where they are because of a certain style. It really comes down to this servant leadership and stepping back. And it takes a lot of courage for someone who hasn't done that before to do that.
Yeah, and I was actually just speaking to one of our managers recently that's kind of gone through that. He's like, it was very hard for me at first, and I started to let a little control go, and he's like, I love it now because I feel like he just feels so much satisfaction in knowing that like he's the person that just come to when they need something removed. And so, he's the guy that goes out and, helps remove all the impediments, and he now has like a new identity associated with that. But it is, to your point, Adam, it's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight, and there are a lot of emotions that will go along with that kind of transformation.
Just something maybe I would add here. It's a hierarchical organization going agile. You might find yourself in a situation where the teams, for example, like tech teams or other teams, are already sort of like applying the agile principles. But what you might find, if there is a management team, very often the management team is the one that's not functional.
Yeah.
Or dysfunctional.
So I think that this change really needs to come, like it needs to be implemented there, and like in this kind of situation, probably needs to go from top down, but they really need to be on board. Yes.
So the reality is there's a big shift in management when you go agile. Or if you don't see that there's a big shift, you may not actually be going agile. Imagine you're a functional manager who's been used to calling the shots and what the team does, and now the team totally does that, right? Or if you don't see the team doing that, then you're not going agile. So there is, and this is a tough thing because there is a career shift that's happening, but it can be, as you heard, for the better. However, maybe you don't need as many functional managers. It's just the reality. However, with that being said, I've seen some functional managers become good product owners, right? Because they functionally knew the product. So they can become good product owners as long as they can step away from that hierarchical control. Some become great career managers. So instead of like 7 people, now they're career manager, functional manager of 7, now they're career manager of 15. Because they can. Some become more enabled to focus on strategy. Because they probably should have been focusing on strategy anyway, connecting strategy to their work, and because they were so into the day-to-day, they hadn't, now they can. They can act as servant leaders, they can act as impediment removers. Impediment remover is actually huge. A lot of times, teams, once you start going self-organizing, there needs to be a lot of impediments removed. The Scrum Master will do the first wave of that, but there's often bigger impediments in the way, and that's where manager help out.
And in case something goes wrong, who's held accountable for it?
Well, if it's a self-organizing team, they'll still have a manager, but the team should be held accountable. So with Agile, it's not just do whatever you want. It's Amy referenced the term psychological safety. So there has to be safety paired with accountability. So the team has to be held accountable. Now, I will still challenge the whole notion, what if something goes wrong? Well, there's usually a lot of other variables that have caused that thing to go wrong. Was the manager removing the impediments, right? Was there other variables that came out of left field where the team all of a sudden had to drop everything they were doing and do something else? So I had to look more closely on what that thing wrong is before I really do much else.
In the context of an agile transformation in a company which is not totally agile, could it be done to tackle first HR before top managers?
There you go. Could you just repeat the question? I'm not sure I heard.
So I heard the question is, in an organization that isn't yet agile, is the best way to start with HR, like to tackle with HR first?
Yeah, if it could be done, actually, with success. HR before top managers.
I think bringing HR in early is very important if you haven't already started. You know, we started really within our technology organization and then brought HR into it after. And I think if you're being deliberate about your transformation, then yes, I think HR should be at the core of that, because you can think about, I mentioned before, a lot of the practices and the processes, and Daniella talked about processes. You know, it's about adapting kind of the way in which we promote culture and engagement and things like that. So I think approaching it in a partnership would be helpful. But Antonio, Mario has a lot of experience in this area too, so we can ask Mario.
First, why don't we hear share?
I really like the word you just used, partnership. It should be a partnership, I think. And would you bring HR for the management? People are just as important, but HR would, I'm just trying to think of a situation where we would actually work in a hierarchical organization trying to be agile. I would say both are very important. So, yeah, I'm not sure if there's a priority who should go first, right? Because usually HR is in that kind of organization, HR will be part of the management team. So,
yeah, that's actually what I was going to say. HR is typically part of the management team, right? Or they're certainly well connected to the management team. Oftentimes, though, Agile is started at the team level, right? And it needs to be experimented with there. So I would encourage experimentation at the team level first, just to see how it's going. If it looks good, then I would start looking at HR soon thereafter. Start connecting them to what's going on. Now, I personally think that as we move into the next 5 years, 10 years, there has to be a reinvention of HR anyway. It's going to happen. Companies are going to go companies are going agile, or let's put it this way, command and control and hierarchy are slowly going to lose market share because they can't adapt to the ever-changing marketplace. Because of that, the different departments are going to have to reinvent themselves anyway. And it's better if HR is on the wave, the leading wave of that, as opposed to falling behind. So I would strongly encourage them to get them involved earlier than later, for sure.
Following the same example, the same paradigm, I know there's a question it's a question without an easy solution, but the first steps, imagine, let's say that you have an HR department which is not at all into Agile. They have heard about it, but they don't know at all. As a Scrum Master, I feel that, we can propose trainings. I don't know if maybe training should go first. Maybe we should create a community of practice and then try to involve them into it. I really don't know which should be the strategy, if there is a good strategy for this.
What would you guys have liked?
Yeah, I mean, I think that bringing them in and sharing with them what you're doing and what you're working on and why it's valuable and the value that you're bringing to your customers and how it's helping the business, would be really helpful. Bring them in and share that with them, educate them, begin to educate them on what you're doing and how you're doing it and why it's important. And to what Mario was saying before, yes, there's an education piece where HR needs to be educated more deeply. We traditionally as HR professionals have a lot of experience in helping teams form and productivity within teams and how to help teams become high-performing teams. And really there's so much synergy between what is trying to be accomplished in Agile and some of the traditional training attributes of what HR has done in the past. So bringing them in early, I think, is really important because there's complementary practices and skills there.
Yeah. Maybe to be in a form of, a talk within a company where team members come in and they share their experience, like how Agile has helped them.
I mean, at the end of the day, our goal is to help teams be effective, and if Agile is like a way to help teams be more effective, then I would imagine most HR teams would want to participate in that.
Yeah, so the one thing though I would caution is you don't really want to bring in HR and teach them Scrum.
Right.
That's not going to help, because then they'll scratch their head like, I don't know why I'm listening to this. Instead, you want to teach them more of the cultural aspects of Agile. Effective teams, high-performing teams. You might want to teach them a little bit like the Tuckman's model, like, hey, there's forming, storming, norming, and performing. And so they can get they can start connecting that part of Agile with HR world that Amy just shared. It's like, oh, okay, so we do focus on performing teams, and so are you. So you want to connect them to those areas of Agile that start bringing them, for them to start pulling for more.
Yeah, I'm not sure how transparent companies where you're at, but maybe also what I found really helpful is doing sort of not so much formal, but a company climate survey. People can express the changes they would like to see or what works, what doesn't, and what the organization should stop doing, continue, and start. It's a nice issue, usually driven by HR. So you could help there.
What does career progression look like in an Agile organization?
Career progression. So the question is, what does career progression look like? So oftentimes I see Agile organizations want to become a little flatter. Meaning, it's not like junior this, senior this. It's not like all of these levels. Because at the end of the day, many Agile organizations realize that it's a little less about the title and the grade, and quite frankly, more about, am I making enough money? Right? And if I'm making enough money, I don't even focus on money anymore. I focus on building relationships. I focus on effective teams and things like that. So I think there's an opportunity to flatter organizations. And this, though, pairs a lot with our earlier discussion about performance reviews and all that kind of stuff. Because if you make that a big deal, then it becomes a big deal for everyone. If you start to tone that down, make sure people have, focus on, they don't focus on the money so much, more about their growth. I have this joke that, hey, as long as you pay me enough, you can call me a janitor. I don't care, right? And so I think that's the direction. There'll still be career growth, but it'll be more growth around your personal growth. But it'll be more related to like salaries or increase in salaries, less about like I got a promotion, things like that. Although that's going to still matter to some, but only if the organization continues to make that a big deal.
I would say a big shift is overcoming this mental model of career growth means I'm managing people, going up the ladder. It's more horizontal growth, adding skill sets, teaching other people, mentoring.
Yeah, we talked about it a lot as a career lattice. If you know a lattice, the lines go up, all over versus a ladder. And thinking about your career is more this lattice of opportunities, and it's a journey, and building on that journey. What's the next path that you will take, and just or becoming more T-shaped, not just narrowly focused in one particular area. So that's one of the things we talk about. But I think your question is a good question, because if you have a hierarchical organization that's used to level and title, and you move, it's not going to be right for everyone. I think that's the thing that you need to know, is as you go through an agile transformation, there will be some people that still, even though you pay me really well, I actually really want that title because that means something to me. Those folks probably won't be the right fit for your organization as you go forward. And so I think you need to know when to recognize, those differences, and when some people do just need to leave because it's not a fit for them anymore, and that's okay. And therefore, it becomes very important that you hire in for your cultural values and the mindsets and the culture that you aspire to be. And I would encourage you to almost hire more over on the culture side than the skill side, because those are the important individuals that will fit the organization long term.
Is there any correlation between, any correlation between, they were talking about KPIs before, between Agile and employee engagement and employee retention? Have you noticed any significant improvement along the lines of Agile in those two ways?
We have not, but anecdotally, I've been talking to teams that are operating in a more Agile sense, and we ask them, would you ever go back? Because we have teams that are not working in Agile. And we say to them, would you ever actually leave this team that you have here, where you work over here, in a cross-functional way, and you're delivering end-to-end? Would you leave that and come back over here? And no, I would not. So, what we're learning is that we're through conversations hearing that people are much more engaged in working in this way.
What I wanted to add is how important is hiring the right talent with focus on culture. It's so important. I couldn't stress more. We, for example, at Kodify, we have a very good thing called tribal recruitment. We've got several stages of the process when there's several people involved. But for example, one of the last things that we do is we take the candidates that we really like for beers. So the team assesses if there's a fit, because it could be a great technical match, but there could be no fitting whatsoever, and maybe that person wouldn't fit in the long run within the company. So hiring the right talent, but really with focus on the culture, and really selling them the culture, not in a sort of salesy kind of way, but just telling them what the company is about, what are our values, as you said. That's super important. And also, it's the growth and career progression. It's not in a vertical kind of way. If you're a full stack team leader, what's the next thing? You're going to be a CTO. What's the next? It's just not scalable this way. So it's keeping people motivated and giving them the tools to learn, to exchange their knowledge with others. It's being it through hack weeks, or working on interesting projects, or exchanging ideas with different teams. That I think is something that people value even more than
There's the saying, you should hire for attitude and fit, because you can always teach skills. You can't always teach attitude and fit.
One question, now that we were talking about salaries, how are these salary reviews organized in such of these agile organizations?
I mean, we're still doing it in a pretty traditional sense, you know, understanding kind of what the role is and how that, you know, matches the market. And right now, as we go more agile, we still envision being able to identify kind of what people are doing and being able to match that to the market and making sure that our paid philosophies are competitive. So I'm not sure if that really answers your
Well, my question was more linked to if we are not in a hierarchical organization, in the traditional organization, you have the manager that is proposing the salary increase. How is it managed in this kind of organization?
So it kind of depends on how far along you are with like self-organization, self-learning, and self-management. At some point, you can make the shift where kind of the team can decide. But this gets back to if there's team goals, then the team can decide like, hey, we should all get the same performance. Because if you're trying to operate as a team, technically you should all get the same percentage increase, right? Because otherwise, then you're saying, well, he's better than me, and it's kind of there's a transition point that you have to make, and it's often a hard one. But that's where the 360s that were mentioned and things like that come into play. But I would also caution you, though, separate that from growth. There's growth, like, hey, you know, Amy, you know, thank you for that growth, you know, information you say I should grow here. Versus, you know, there's a percentage increase that everyone should have. Keep those very separate.
I'm from the baby boomer generation, one of the few ones here. Or nobody, I don't know.
Well, like darling. We are the two only ones.
Yeah. We were educated, hard work, hard fun. But first hard work. And not the other way around. And in my first steps in the corporate world were to have a leader, a boss, a mentor, somebody to admire, to learn from. This was my main engagement to come to a company. And if we are now the digital natives who are coming, and the millennials, the X generation, which in the next decade will only remain, if you only want to work in an agile organization, where do you learn from? Where is your mentor? Where is your boss, your leader? And it's a little bit difficult for me to understand the new concept. Yes.
I think you learn from your peers and your team and everyone around you, and you find, you know, you get challenged by those individuals.
But we are like, we need leaders to show us the way. We can't be leaders of everybody.
I work in a very big and hierarchical organization, and I never learn anything from my bosses.
That's good, yeah.
Okay. Then leaders in a big organization. I learn from my peers. I manage, I did my networks, and my best teachers were more senior people having more experience and working by my side, so they were my peers.
Yeah, oftentimes you will see coaches, master coaches, and there's still going to be leaders that emerge. It doesn't, just because you're in an agile world doesn't mean there won't be a coaching mentor relationship. There are many, right? There are many more senior to junior, there are peer to peer. So it's just another way of looking at it, but there's still plenty of coaching mentor type of relationships there that still exist.
I hope this agile model is not applicable for families, isn't it?
Oh,
yes. No, there must be a father and mother who has to be the directresses. I don't agree.
So I think
there are no friends in a family.
So may I suggest, so where you might be struggling with, keep in mind, an agile team still has a product owner that's prioritizing the work. It's not like the team comes in and says, I'm going to do whatever I want. Right? There's still a product owner that says, I'm hearing from the customer. Customer says this is the highest value work. And it's the product owner's responsibility to share that with the team. This is the order I would like you to work. Now, the team may say I have a dependency here and some things, but otherwise, the team is not deciding to just work on whatever. It still needs to be prioritized by the product owner, and that's where the shift is. There was a functional manager that might have done that before. Now it's a product owner, but the product owner doesn't have the team reporting to them. Instead, they're very, very focused on what's customer value. So the team is still hyper-focused on the work, and they're getting that work from the product owner via the backlog in a priority order. It just, the team gets to decide how to do that work. But they still need to understand what the priority is.
Actually, I want to add something on your idea of a mentor. I actually think it's a really nice idea if you can find someone in the company who can be a mentor. Because in my previous company, I actually asked one of the VP of one of the VPs from the management if he could be my mentor, because I felt that he was bringing so much value on a personal level, like bringing his leadership qualities, and the way he was engaging with his team was so amazing that I was like, wow, this is like, I want to learn from you. And so we had regular sort of like mentorship sessions, and I said to him like, please be my mentor, like I would love to learn from you. So having sort of like that kind of hierarchical model was very helpful, and it's nice if you can identify, if you can find someone like that who can really like support you and bring a lot of value into your professional career.
Yeah, because one thing that should exist in an agile company is continuous learning, continuous process improvement, and so that should be part of every agile employee's DNA. Like, how can I learn more? How can I grow? So they should be seeking out people that they can learn from, new education opportunities, and people to speak with.
Is this model linked? Is this model linked to nationality? For example, I'm German. I can't imagine a German small and medium-sized company in an agile organization. Maybe a tech company, but one of these typical German companies, industrial company.
I don't think it's really only connected to the nationality, it's more the generation. So I would say I have more in common with my generation in another country than with other Germans who might be in different ages. So I think it doesn't really, the mentality is not that critical.
It is true that certain industries are more receptive of Agile than others, but we're also seeing now Agile start to seep into a lot of different organizations. In Vistaprint, we have a big manufacturing part, and they do lean, a lot of lean type work. So, it's lean and Agile are very, very, they're like cousins, right? So, manufacturing, it's like, come on, but they do tons of lean. Their whole line is lean work. So they're very related.
I just wanted to agree with her, because I've been developing for many times, and I know people that is really, really, really good at his job. This has a really good technical skills, and he continues to grow in the technical ladder, or maybe into management. And this person, when he goes to management or to technical ladder, maybe has problems delegating to other people. Maybe, has a lot of problems, and I think that this kind of person, because I've been speaking 10 minutes with that person, and with 10 minutes of that person is half a week, not spending, not wasting my time. And I think that it's really, really important the technical guys to start changing the way of doing his job and start to sharing to other people. And in my company there was a guy that all the people wanted to stay with him around and asking, and later he was performing a lot. Still, this kind of guy has to share the information.
A lot of people don't understand that there's actually a lot of technical Agile practices, right? Pair programming, refactoring, unit testing, continuous integration. So there really is, even for very technical people, a a lot of opportunity to learn Agile, to collaborate, and things like that. But they have to be interested and want to do it. There's plenty of opportunity. And, 80% of Agile environment is actually building something, right? The other 20% is maybe doing a stand-up and a number of other things, but everything else is building the product.
And this kind of guy, for example, don't know how to delegate properly. Nobody managed him to say, okay, you have to split the work, or because he's really enthusiastic about what he does. I mean, it's something that you have to try to work with this kind of attitude.
Scrum really provides a mechanism for providing feedback. If one guy is not delegating enough within the sprints, that typically is an obstacle to the other members of the team.
Yeah.
So it may show up in the retrospective.
Yeah.
So I think I have a comment just to add on to that. I think the other important thing too is that try to understand why this person is the way they are. I helped coach a team where 30% of the team was actually full-time employees. The other 70% are all contractors. And contractors work on a contract, right, an agreement with the company. And so, in examining like their history, this company always got nailed on defects, right? So, if part of your team is not aligned with everyone else, and they've had this history of just being pounded on, you're only natural to want to protect yourself, right? And so, you got this knowledge, you don't want to have anything go wrong, and so you keep everything to yourselves. So I think it's, aside from like, you see this outward demonstration and kind of symptoms of what's happening, also trying to understand, okay, why is this person the way they are? Might help you find ways to improve the situation. If this person doesn't feel safe within a team because he's working remotely, and if there's a single defect in there, they're getting charged. They're actually, that's coming out of the contract, and the contractor's paying for it. It's trying to find ways to give this guy some safety and make him feel like he doesn't have to take this burden on himself, or anything else that might feel give him want to have less control of things. So I think that's also important too, because you see this this wall that you see. This is just the outward appearance of it, but there's probably something else kind of driving that behavior also.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I really liked your story about your generation and wanting a leader, and so I thought I might share a perspective from maybe a different generation. One of the reasons I chose Vistaprint is because through the interview process and meeting everyone, they made it very clear that from day one, everyone contributes. And they have a lot to share and to teach, but also they expect you to contribute and to learn from you. And they recognize that even from day one, you have different experiences and you can have something to share. So that was really inspirational to me, and that was a culture that I wanted to be part of. So I think it just shows how things are shifting and also how important that culture is when you're hiring people.
Nice conversation. I would like to ask something which is more context specific to Scrum. Scrum is so clearly seen as a delivery framework to deliver projects, but it is also an improvement framework. It has been a Kaizen, an improvement meeting, which is a retrospective. And some of the things identified in retrospective can be managed by the team themselves, because they are self-organizing, but some other external impediments are going perhaps to change, to reshape the organization. So I don't know if the Scrum managers trying to sort out those impediments and to communicate them to the management are successful on their own, or they somehow feel like HR is going to help them to tackle those impediments, systemic ones.
Well, we've heard from teams that they feel like they oftentimes can't get their work done because there's too many dependencies on other teams. And so that's feedback that's come back to us, not necessarily through retrospectives, but through talking to teams and understanding what some of their challenges are. So one of the things that we've been doing is thinking about like how might we structure our teams differently such that we can break down some of those silos and break down those dependencies and put more cross-functional teams together. together that is in complete support of how Agile works and how teams are formed. And so from an HR perspective, we are taking that feedback and thinking about, how can we help our teams get our best ideas to customers faster by breaking down those silos and those dependencies.
So one of the things that we tried at Vistaprint was having impediment boards in front of like our managers' cubicles or offices. And what we learned was the culture is going to matter a lot on how impediments get dealt with. Because if a Scrum Master comes to a manager who's tried to mitigate the impediment, and the manager says, "Hey, that's why I pay you the big bucks," the Scrum Master will never go to that manager again. And so it's very important for the manager to first say, "Absolutely, I'm here to remove the impediments." Because if you recall what Amy said earlier, one of the manager's new responsibilities needs to have a hyper focus on removing the impediments. And so that, from an HR perspective, should become one of the newer responsibilities. Well, it should have always been the responsibility of a manager, but now it really becomes the hyper focus. Because in Agile, everyone on the team will try to remove that impediment as best as they can within a team scope. But if they can't, that's what they need the manager for. And if the manager doesn't do it, then you start questioning, why are they even there? So that's where there has to be a mindset shift.
Okay, now going more to the specific HR things, can you help us suggesting tools, techniques, or practices that HR people in a more traditional environment may benefit from the Agile world, or HR is using in Agile companies?
I would say focus on technology. It's kind of like a no-brainer, but actually that's where probably the future of HR is when it comes to like processes and managing the information and all these little things that HR does. Like even the admin side is going digital. I think it's really key. So it's very accessible and to everyone. For an HR manager, it's very easy to manage the information. For an employee, it's very easy to access it. Using tools like performance management solutions that are online as well, that are more sort of like flexible and can be defined in many different ways depending on the team or depending on what you're trying to accomplish from that review. So I think technology is definitely one of the things that every kind of HR department needs to think of. Like I'm just reviewing now different tools. I'm not sure if I should mention the names, but there are several things you can use that incorporate onboarding and offboarding and company culture, from like managing payroll to benefits to time off. So these things can make your life so easy as a HR manager and an employee's life easy as well, because you don't have to work with hundreds of spreadsheets and so on. So that's definitely one of the things. Another tool would be like an applicant tracking system when it comes to recruitment. That is very, very helpful as well. So several people can collaborate within the process.
So maybe more on some of the practices or techniques. I think about, like, as we go more agile in HR, I think about making sure that what we work on is in support of the organization. So similarly, how agile teams want to get your best ideas to your customers faster, and are you driving value in what you're delivering to the customer? We want to drive value in what we're delivering to the organization. So making sure that what we're working on is driving value. So going through a similar exercise of making sure that we are driving value. I also think that the things that we can do to support the organization through the role of the manager, helping coach managers into this new role of the manager. And then we talked earlier about our practices, like modifying your practices to actually reward the behaviors that you seek in your new culture and in the mindset that you wish to have in an agile environment. Like total rewards, rewards and recognition, the way in which we compensate people or reward people might need to be different in a fully agile world. We already talked about performance feedback, but even in a training program, like we can think about how we might be able to deliver things in more increments too. Like I think it would be really important for us as an HR organization to also model, breaking down our work. Maybe we need to deliver a full training to an organization because around servant leadership, maybe we take one aspect of that and deliver it in a geography or to one team and get feedback and enhance that program as we go. So those are some of the things I think about from our practices.
Speaking about tools, do you also use canvases? And if you do, what do you put, what's on a canvas in HR? Because I could see all the development teams that have canvases and they have an end product, but with HR, how does it work? So it's a continuous cycle.
Yeah, so we in our HR team are just building a Kanban board to think about what are the key strategic priorities that we're working on that are in support of the organization, like I talked about. So the performance and development one is one that visually I have it in my mind, like what we're doing. We're actually going to be doing this in the next couple of weeks, but starting to put our priorities on a board and then having these daily stand-ups around what we're doing and what value will drive TI.
Maybe just to add a point and building on what you said, Amy, it's one tip or one point to start where to start with your work for a traditional company, a hierarchical company, is for the HR people or talent people actually to get as close as possible to the business and understand and grasp what is it that actually our teams need. And that starts with small things, by sitting with the people, and not only with the HR teams, but sitting together with the people, with the business folks, asking them questions, what they do on a day-to-day basis, where their struggles are, where you can support them, enable them. And actually, it's very interesting because the more you talk, the more patterns you will hear. And say, hey, this is actually something I've heard from 10 people across the organization. So is this something that I could help with? And really drafting actually your agenda, whether you call it an HR agenda or a business agenda, it is in support of the business on something that the teams are trying to achieve.
Yeah. And building on that, thank you, we're because we're going through an agile transformation, we are doing it through a lot of experimentation and having teams experiment and learning from those experiments. And so we have been going out and having conversations in HR with those teams that are experimenting to really learn, like what's working well for you, what's enabling your success, what are some of the blockers that you face. If you were to start over again, and we just have a list of questions that we ask them that talk about team and structure and that help us so that as we go out and coach and think about a wider scale transformation, let's learn from the things that we're doing well. To Mario's point, really being a learning organization, let's learn from those things and help teams from the get-go with some of those key learnings.
So you say that you get the information talking to everybody, talking to the entire organization, and also you mentioned before the climate survey. How often, for example, you take the climate survey for employees?
In the first company where I worked, it was a small company, we did twice a year.
Twice a year.
Yeah. But it depends on the organization needs.
We have an annual employee engagement survey, which we have mixed reviews about, to be honest. And we've also just implemented a employee promoter score. We have a net promoter score, and so we just went out with one of our first surveys on, how likely would you be to recommend Vistaprint? And so that is something we'll be doing quarterly. So it's a one-question survey.
There are some applications, cloud applications for the real-time feedback, and I don't know if it's a good tool, if you know someone that practice that to analyze all the data that it comes from these kind of tools. I don't know if you have the experience.
This was actually a challenge we had. We didn't use it at all, so it was I have to say that.
And your opinion is kind of useful.
I can't recommend it too because we didn't use we actually use a Typeform just to gather the feedback itself, and then we analyze the team. Because, for example, we did this as an exercise within the team because we had something in my first company we called it the Culture Club, which was sort of like an open forum. A meeting was held once a month, and anyone from the company can participate and bring their ideas forward. So we would use Redbook, the application itself, sort of to write proposals, ideas in progress, and so we had people from several teams joining, and they would just propose ideas saying what they want to see change in the company. One of the things that several people proposed was a climate survey. Other proposals were cultural activities and so on. But this is an exercise that we did as a team. We identified different sections like communication, relationship with the management, career progression, work-life balance, and we divided this survey into two because it was a lot of information for a first one to tackle, and then a lot of also it's a big challenge to analyze all this data. So that was the first step. We didn't use any tool for that, so it was a work exercise to set it up and then to gather the data and deliver it to the team. What I think is really important with this kind of surveys that you need to, like, the management team, if there is one in the organization, needs to work on that. Needs to be on board with that as well. Because what do you do with all that outcome, right? Like, okay, so you deliver the feedback to people, and then what?
That's the next step.
It's really important, exactly, to act on it and to take it further.
The other thing I would add, unfortunately, a lot of the sort of bigger surveys, the feedback loop is very long. And if it's long, don't even bother, because in a week from now, so many things can change. So whatever you do, make sure it's very short feedback loops. If you ever think of anything like that, it's got to be very short. Otherwise, don't even bother. And also, I think what you're saying now, you better do something with it. If an employee contributes to a survey and nothing is done with it, I'm not going to be so serious about contributing to it the next time.
You lose that.
Okay, so that's all for me. I don't know if you have any extra question. Just to repeat that I'm grateful to Vistaprint for hosting us and having the chance to talk to Amy, Daniela, Mario. We'll have some crisps over there if you want to talk informally to each other. And thank you again for coming. Thank you.